an opportunity to ask questions, and I hope that we'll do that. I see that we have John Hill with his hand up in the back, so let's start with John.
Thank you, Professor Robson. I'm very interested to hear a little bit about what it's like for you in the horrible, godless world of the academy. But maybe as you talk about that, you could give examples of sort of how you manage that conversation that you were talking about in that environment.
Yeah, actually, this whole thing started for me in a very, this is not a plant, actually. This whole idea for me started because I write world religion textbooks. And it's a kind of an odd thing to do, both as a historian and as an Orthodox Christian. And also as a person who hates textbooks. Like, I think most textbooks I've ever read are just hideously bad. So what I try to do, and quite literally the reason that this all came about, is I was trying to write a different kind of textbook. And the polynomials, what I hope it taught me was first that when I wrote this textbook, I have one, and I'm in the midst of another one. I don't use a sort of omniscient voice, so I don't say, this is how things are, right? I introduce people as myself, and I talk about myself, and I mention my love of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I mention the relationship that I have with, you know, my professors and my old professors and what I learned from them, with the idea that I'm offering a voice that then someone can respond to, right? And then for me, the other thing the second thing is that, unlike a lot of textbooks, I put a huge amount of emphasis on the analysis of pictures. Because it gives people a way who are not used to thinking about religion, a way to talk about things without being embarrassed. Actually, that's what the Steelers do too. I talk about Steeler Nation as a religion. Not that you guys would think about that, you know, except for that one weekend when OSU was the devil. No, I guess the OSU is always the devil, right? But you know what I'm saying. That you can. So I try to introduce a conversation about something that is not hard. That is not. We can talk about the Steelers because it's easier to talk about than religion. And then the last thing that I do in the textbook, or at least I hope I do, is I put a lot of emphasis on how people really live. So instead of trying to make a, you know, write a textbook and say, these are all things that Muslims believe, and these are all the things that Confucians believe, I try to do it the other way. I start by, so for example, when I was writing about a Buddhist temple, you know, there's a very specific Buddhist temple that I think is really beautiful that I write about, and I talk about that if you're walking up to it, you can stop, and there's always a little person there, a little cart that sells these potato noodles that are really famous in that part of China. And so you really need to stop and buy some potato noodles, right? And then that'll kind of fortify you because you have, you know, like 13 stories that you have to climb. And you're interacting with these various figures of the Buddha while you're doing it. So I hope that by bringing it to that scale that people begin to think of it as a conversation. And then, sort of the orthodoxy thing that I do, is that so far as I know, I and maybe one other person are the only world religion textbooks where orthodoxy gets a third of the Christianity stuff, right? So, and I slyly do that by saying, we're going to move from east to west as we talk about Christianity, right? And so I'll just finish up by saying, one set of readers who said, kind of, what the, you know, is this? Why is there so much orthodoxy? Nobody cares about that. And then I had another set of readers that said, there's too much Protestantism in this, right? And I had a third set of readers that said, thank God, he talked about the Protestant churches in America. And my editor said, all right, we're good then. You know? So that's how I do it. And when I teach classes, you know, I teach them as much as I can as a conversation. And my students hate it. You know, they want a lecture, right? They want to sit down and they want me to give it to them, and they want to be able to regurgitate it back. And it really bothers them when I don't. But I think in the end it's better.
What do your colleagues think about all of that?
You know, it's funny. I teach in a department that is a multidisciplinary department. So we have historians and art historians and musicians and classicists. And what we've noticed is that most of us do this and we just never thought about the fact that we did. And there are no other Orthodox Christians, I don't think, in that department. No, there definitely aren't. So I don't necessarily sort of pull out the polynomials and say, this is my model for it, right? Although I have. But at least the people that I work closely with have kind of fallen naturally into that tradition of conversation. And I think the thing that maybe is different between us and other people, or between me and other people, is I have a very strong feeling that I'm probably like one of the dumbest people in the room at any given time. And it's a lot easier to listen to other people, and it's not fake. I mean, I really think I probably am one of the dumbest people in the room at any given time. So like, it would be stupid if I didn't listen to it. It would be just dumb for me. Does that help at all?
Sure.
Other questions, Mathias?
Professor, thank you. I was listening to your description of the polynomials, and I was thinking, yeah, that's exactly what it does, and that's exactly what it does, and that's exactly what it does. And then I thought, and that is just almost identical to everything else that we do in all of the services.
Yeah, of course.
But,
I would agree.
but it brings it to a point.
Yeah, it's really good. Like, it's got it all there, right? I mean, that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, I was thinking about that today in service. I was thinking, yeah, this is really, yes. And I think also, actually, it's the thing that makes being in an Orthodox service so difficult if you're not used to it, right? Because if you go to other kinds of services, it's very well scripted, right? And one thing happens and another thing happens, and you kind of watch it going on. And part of the fun and part of the sort of, as I say, sort of full body experience is also the thing that it can be really crazy, really hard when you walk into a service and you don't know what's going on and you don't know why it's there and why are they moving books around and why is it suddenly it's done 7 and then it's done 8, and in that situation, I think maybe the best thing to do is just to let it roll right over you. Just let it flow over you, because you're not going to fight it, and you're probably not going to understand it the first 500 times you do it. So just let it go. But I think you're right. I think it's just the one that I picked because I really like it.
I really think it's a great way to. It would be tragic if every time a person came into the service and didn't know what was going on, and they asked anyone around them, and they said, "What is this?" and the person said, I'm not sure. So it's good for the faithful to avail themselves of these little studies and big studies, and to say, I remember years ago I read the Divine Liturgy by Nikolai Gogol. It's just meditation on the liturgy, and it was amazing. And I started going to the services after reading the book, watching them more and listening more and waiting for those parts that really caught his attention.
Yeah.
And so it was just utterly helpful.
And I guess, for me personally, the other half of the other phrase to add on is, I really don't know what's going on, but it's cool, isn't it? Right? Like this is really something.
Yeah.
So that's okay. I'm not.
I see John Wilhelm has his hand up, so John, please.
Foot and mouth, but I had a feeling in your description of the question about your relations with your colleagues, I didn't have a strong feeling of a lot of sharing. And I was wondering about that and how you feel, because I'm an unorthodox Christian, as people around here know, but this is also my second church, and it very much is. And I think that the Orthodox have a lot to share with others. And by others, I mean the rest of the church community.
Yeah, I mean, I teach at a secular school with people of lots of different traditions. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm Orthodox. I have icons in my office. I get, it's easy to do that because I'm also a Russian historian, so nobody thinks it's weird, right, that I do. I guess, for me, I would love to believe that my colleagues think, he's a pretty good guy, he's trustworthy, he's a Boy Scout, quite literally. Like you can count on him to tell the truth, not to pull the wool over your eyes, not to do something bad to the students, and that even if they are unchurched, or if they're not Orthodox, or if they're Jewish, or if they're Muslim, that's what they get for me, and that's what being an Orthodox is for me in that world, you know. And I think personally, the more if I were to talk about it more in a more missionary way, I think people listen less and less. Or that seems to be in my situation, and so a lot of it is just like living out that ideal very poorly most of the time, but at least thinking about it. You know, my dad was married to my mother for 40 years before he converted. He called himself the loyal opposition. Came to church, came to Sunday school, the whole thing. And finally, and I think he really ultimately did it mostly for my mother as much as for him. And I remember him going to the priest of the church and saying, well, you know, I'm not sure that I don't not believe. And he said, and they said, that's good enough for us, right? Joe, come on, let's go. We're going to duck in because you've been doing this for a long time, you know. And my wife is Episcopalian. My wife is not Orthodox, and I'm very at home there. And they with me at the Episcopal Church, where she is a church singer. Where, you know, she's a professional singer. And I've often wondered why I wasn't more uncomfortable there. Like maybe it's that I'm not a very good Orthodox and I'm not very comfortable there. And I don't know, but it does seem to be that for me, the answer kind of to your question is just trying to live it, just trying to do it. And nobody notices I have a cross on, though I do all the time. My mother would hit me if I didn't. But you know, but I wouldn't mind you know, if they ask, I'll show it to them. That kind of thing. Is that useful at all, what I said? Other questions? Walter.
Doctor, first of all, thank you for your enthusiasm. Thank the church, Father, you know, for giving us this opportunity. With all the intelligent questions around, I feel like my question might not be, you know, that high standing. As a historian, though, how many religions are there?
All right. I'll answer that. So the question is, how many gods are there in Hinduism? And the answer is 1, 3, 3,000, 30 million, or infinite. So my answer to you is 3, 3,000. I have no clue. I haven't idea. I mean, I can tell you that when I'm writing about world religions, I do what are often called sort of the big 5. So I do Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then I do a section that talks about how the traditional Chinese ideas then interacted with these things. So Chinese Buddhism is a little different than, say, you know, Vietnamese Buddhism or something like that. Sort of Confucian and Taoist ideas. And then I talk about either, so that's more than the big 5. And then I usually do a chapter on what are often called local religions. So religions that really only exist in one place. Shinto, for example, is really, I mean, you leave Japan, you don't get Shinto anymore, right? And then the final one are new religions that are popping up, and they tend to have 2 kinds. One are religions that are trying to recreate something from before. So the Wiccans, right, the witches are one of these. It's like, there must have been this religion called witches, and so we're going to make it up thinking about what we'd like it to be and then say that that's what it was. Well, of course it wasn't. Well, maybe it was, but nobody knows, right? But then there's the other kind, that is the religion that says, no, we're going to look to the future, we're going to create something brand new. You know, the Scientologists actually are probably an example of that. My personal favorite in the group, and I apologize if anyone is one because I don't mean to be laughing about it, are people who believe that UFOs are like angels of God coming and talking to us. They're called Raylinians, and they believe that UFOs came and gave us the Bible, and then we messed it up as humans, and so they have to go back and look at it. to the extraterrestrials to fix it again. So that's what I do. I talk about sort of the big ones in the world, and then I try to organize some of the others. But I haven't a clue how many there are. And I don't know if one can count. And in fact, among academics, there's a huge debate if we could even use the word religion. Because, you know, if you think of Satyana Dharma, of the sort of universal Dharma of Hindus, Hindus would say, it's not a religion, it's a way of life. Well, we might say that too, right? It's not separate from our lives. It is our life, right? Islam would say that too. So there are people who say we can't even use the word religion. And in fact, the new book that I have is going to be called Exploring the Sacred World, because I don't want to use the word religion, because maybe they're not. Maybe there's something else.
Brother Michael?
I just want to say it's a real treat for all of us, I think, to have you here, Professor. And we would be amiss if we didn't ask you about your religious background. I don't know what the proper term is. Is it old believer or old ritualist?
Well, we prefer true Orthodox, or the only real ones. But usually we don't say that except when we're at home. Yes.
Well, I don't know. Do you refer to us as Nikonites?
Oh yes, we certainly do. Nikonians.
No,
Yes,
the reason I'm
absolutely.
asking is because I wrote a paper that was published many years ago on that, and I have great sympathies for the old ritualists. I think our Chassis Flova Book of Hours was sort of...
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, it was messed up.
I agree, yeah.
But I just wonder if you could address your experiences as an old ritualist in the United States.
Yeah, so I come from a sort of, well, I come from a mixed family. My mother was born here, and she was the last of 11. 8 were born in the States, 3 were born in Belarusia. They were great, ethnically great Russians, but living in Belarusia for centuries. And my mother was one of the first, actually, to marry what we called Americans, right? A non-old believer. And Americans kind of even included all of the other Orthodox, right? You know, so there were the American, I mean, there was Americans, and then there were the, we don't know what to do with them because they're not us, but they are kind of like us, Orthodox, right? And we have actually a lot of Unions in Erie when I grew up too, so the Eastern Rite folk, who have actually some liturgical things that are much closer to the old belief than it's funny stuff. So there was a way in which I grew up in an exceedingly Russian, exceedingly Orthodox, exceedingly traditional household. You know, my mother braided my sister's hair every morning, and they screamed and yelled about it. I'm sure I'm braided in services are extremely long. There's a feeling that if it's possible to repeat something again, one ought to, right? So when I started going to Synod Parochial services, I'm like, wow, this is great. This is incredibly fast, you know? Because, for example, a canon would be read like, 13 times or something, right? So it's much longer, right? The services are much longer. We only prostrate a couple of times during the year. No, right? So there are prostrations all the time, and you do them all the same way. Everyone learns from a kid how you do it. It's basically like a squat thrust, if you remember that from and we all do it the same way. We all cross ourselves the same way. We all stand the same way. We all stand in rows. So there's this sense of kind of communal periodic, kind of communal order to full believer services.
Do you still primarily use nominee chant? And all
Yeah, although in English. So it's by the signs, but it's been turned into English. So the other side of it was is that since I'm now a 1.5 or second generation, and my father was not Orthodox for most of his life, we also very much grew up just as like regular, mid-American or mid-Atlantic kids. My cousins like the Browns. I don't understand it, but I still love them, right? I mean, I pity them now. But but you know what I mean? So there was very much that. It was very much an American thing. The thing about the old believers, I think, is the sense of you want to do it all. You don't want to cut corners. Even if you don't like it, you're gonna do it. Even if it takes a long time, you're gonna do it. And I don't know that that's right for all Orthodox, but I think it's a useful point of comparison for other places. It's also extremely communal. So I'll give you one example. When when the priests come out at the great entrance, instead of saying what everyone else in the world says, right? The old believers say, "May the Lord God remember you in His kingdom, now and forever, and unto the ages of ages." Say it 6 times. There's no tsar. There's no bishop. None of that, right? And so there's a way in which the focus of Old Belief liturgy is intensely communal, and that follows on in the way people stand and walk and everything. Nobody's walking around, everyone sort of stands one way. People are very careful about the way they hold their hands, the way they cross themselves.
Men on one side, women on the other?
Yeah, usually. Yeah, although, it's not a hard and fast. Not a hard and
I
fast.
must say you're the first old ritualist I've ever met that doesn't have a beard.
The first time I was in Russia, I was introducing myself to this huge crowd of people. And I said, I'm sorry, I have no beard, but at least I don't smoke. Which is another thing that old believers traditionally didn't do. And that kind of brought them out. My wife hated my beard. And I had my best friend in college used to call it the Petri dish. So I just like, it was really ugly. And now it's totally gray. So I just, the old believer tradition in Erie was that when you retired, you grew your beard, because most of the people I grew up with worked in heavy industry, worked in shops, and it was unsafe. So that was often the way that you knew a guy decided to retire, is that he started to come to church with a beard. Yeah.
Now, are you with the Popovtsimi or Bispopovtsimi?
So we were Bispopovs. So I grew up without any priests, which is, I think, a reason that we're kind of like, about hierarchs, right? Because we didn't have them for centuries. I'm like, well, they're still around. We wish we did. We don't, right? Now we do. So what happened was the Russian church had anathemas against the old believers. In the 1970s, the Rokor Church and the church in Russia dropped those anathemas and asked if we would like to be reunited. Old believers, being old believers, waited like 10 to 15 years to see if they meant it, right? Because we don't do anything quickly. And then said, yes, we would like to. So I am a Popovets. I'm in a church with priests, but I grew up among the Bispopovci. And I have to admit, I still have a great love for that, for reader services because of it. When we lived in North Carolina, we didn't have a priest around. I and a couple other families used to do reader services, and it was kind of a kick for me. It was kind of fun. But it is, even when we have priests, it's a very communal sort of thing. I'll tell you one last thing. Remember at the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof, when the rabbi says, or somebody comes up to the rabbi and says, "Is there a blessing for the Tsar?" Right? And the rabbi thinks for a moment and says, "Yes, may God keep the Tsar far away from us." And I have to say there is a sense of that among old believers, a sense of we've been at this together for a long time, and we like having those bishops and stuff, but we're not all that into them. I don't know that it's right, but it is a thing. One last thing, and I'm going way over here, is that when I'm doing field work or something, when I'm in Russia, it's pretty clear my Russian is not great. It's okay. It's at best passable, but it's certainly not great. I sometimes will grow up here, but usually not. But if I go in, I walk into a church or a little chapel someplace, and I have the old believer thing, right? I hold my hands the right way, I stand the right way, I sing the right way, I can read, I know the tones, and it's amazing to what extent that's the key. That they stop very quickly saying, "Who's that funny-looking American guy?" and start saying, "Wow, right? He knows how to do this in fourth tone." And that's kind of fun. Twice I had people ask me to stay and be the Nastavnik. So being the sort of the lay leader of the parish, and both times I said, my boss and my wife probably. And they, no, your wife can come. She's Episcopalian. It's fine. It's fine if she's Anglican. We don't mind. No.
Do you have that in Erie? Do you have that prayer rug for the kneeling that they
Yeah, sure. And so the services are always started with beginning prayers and ending prayers, which have, except for Bright Week, have prostrations in them. And during Lent, there are probably 30 20, 25 maybe prostrations in every service. And then when the old believers, this is the one, right? This is the killer. When the old believers read
Saint Andrew of Crete.
the Saint Andrew of Crete, people do 3 prostrations for each prayer. So it's known locally as the Night of 1,000 Prostrations. And it's just about, it's like 994 or something.
So you get out about 1 o'clock in the morning?
Well, you start a little bit early, you get out late. The next day is not so bad, but the day after that, it's incredibly painful. Yeah, it's really, I haven't done it in years because I haven't lived up there. And my mother now just goes, as we would say, not to the ground, but just to the waist. And that's cool. She's 87, so that's all right, you know. But yeah, so there's a lot. It's incredibly physical. It is more physical in the same way that Orthodoxy is more physical than Catholicism is. Sort of that much again more physical. I wouldn't recommend it for a lot of people.
So you just have one kind of vow, the Zimmerman
Well, there's Pakuan to the waist,
Okay.
right? There's no sort of this. I still don't actually know how to do that. I don't even know what to call that. What is that?
In Greek, it's called metania.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just to the waist, all the way over, not kind of this, right? But all the way over. And, well, I can show you if you want, right? And you have to actually have, so you have a little thing that you put on the floor called a podruchnik that keeps your hands clean because you don't want to be making the sign of the cross with dirty hands. So you would have one yourself. And it goes like this. And everyone does it precisely that way and has since Jesus.
So I don't want to tell you Irina has a question,
Yeah,
or maybe I'm wrong.
if John is exhausted.
John's done, he's exhausted.
I've been thinking of asking you about the topic, but I can't formulate a question, so I'll just tell you the topic I was thinking about, and maybe you can comment on this. This is about the relationship between ethnicity and faith, and it's such a big topic.
Yeah.
And I guess I have those kind of
Sure.
thoughts about, some impending dangers
Yeah.
of kind of putting, your ethnic identity above your religion, and all kinds of disputes that come out of that.
Oh, yeah.
So if you can comment on that.
Well, I mean, it's something that I've lived through, and one of the things that happened when we became members of the Synod is that we really got people angry because we were using English. And so there was this idea that, good, the old believers are coming in, they're going to be sort of the really strong Slavonic people. And we had completely, all of the services moved to English by that point. So we had a lot of converts, and we had people like me who didn't grow up speaking the language. There was a lot of soul searching in the community where I grew up about how much of what we did was ethnic and how much of what we did was Orthodox but not ethnic. I don't know that the answer that they decided, which was to make everything in English, but still to keep all of the services long and that sort of thing, is necessarily the right one. But it's a very American-looking church in that way. I mean, it's an absolutely Russian-looking church inside, but the people all look very, just American-looking. There's another story about that actually, but to me personally, and in my research that I'm doing now, I feel like all of these things are one part of the conversation, and that I would feel very sad to think that we were losing some of that, like not bringing apples on Transfiguration or something like that, for example, because that's a very Russian tradition. Or carrying pussy willows, right? Instead of starting with carrying palms instead of pussy willows. But I don't think that is the faith. But I think that it's awfully wrong to say that it is not the faith. And so I guess for me, it seems like it's sort of what makes a community healthy. Like, what is the mixture of ethnicity and non-ethnicity that makes a community thrive and healthy and loving, the guy who runs the program that Father and I have both been involved with in the Antiochian Church, he is in, they call it a post-ethnic Orthodox church. I mean, they were very clear both to mix different traditions, but also to build a church that was an American church, always in English, and so that's what worked for them. I think it's one of the really hard things of our time about being Orthodox, because we're so much perceived as being Russians or Serbs or Macedonians or Greeks or Japanese Orthodox or whatever, right? That kind of national thing. And I don't think that it's wrong to be that, and I don't think we ought to lose it, but I think that it's one voice in the conversation. And it worries me when it either is gone or when it's the loudest voice.
I'm wondering, when you travel to Russia, and you described some of it already, that at first, just because you look like American, they don't take you as the same brother in Christ as them. So, what do you think about the big Russian situation in church where, there is a lot of tendencies to equalize, Russian and Orthodoxy? Do you have any comments on that?
I mean, I feel like to the extent that people are healthy, it's fine. To the extent that people are physically and socially and spiritually ill, it's not fine. I'm not really answering you in a way, but that's really how I feel. I feel like it's not something that we can decide except for amongst ourselves, and that ultimately it is a conversation with us and with people who with, for God's sake, Ukrainians or something, right? You know what I mean? Or Poles, or Belarusians, or Germans, So it is a conversation with all of those people, but it's also a conversation within us. I think the thing that's hardest is that, in a weird way, it's easier to be nice to people that aren't like you. It's easier to be nice to a Buddhist in some ways than it is to be nice to a Ukrainian. Or Russian, or whatever, you know what I mean? Because there's a way in which the more like you are, the more easy it is to fight about things. I don't have an answer for that, except that it feels to me like whenever someone is hurt, then that thing is wrong. That's not really an answer, though. Yeah. But I think it is a mixture, especially in America. I think the only way it works is not to forget who you are, but not to make that a cage. But how that works, I think that's up to every community.
Lilia.
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much for a very thought-provoking lecture. I just wanted to comment that I so like the idea about your idea about the conversation which happens during the Orthodox service on many different levels. How vestment moves, priest vestments moves, how we smell Lenten, how priest makes exclamation and the choir replies. So I think this is why Father Gregory and church school ask parents to bring kids to the service. We realize that probably they don't understand 90% of what is going on.
Well, neither do I.
On the rational level. Yeah, on the rational level.
Yeah.
On the other hand, thinking about your idea, we realize that other channels are fed so well. The smell, what they see, how choir and priest, they have a conversation during the whole service, Laden, and beautiful movement of the vestments, all these. So hopefully that these memories, kids' memories about this Orthodox service, it will keep them up during the hardest moments of their life. Yeah, so it was really a nice idea, very poetic, and at the same time, so there is so much truth in it.
Thank you.
This idea of conversation during the Orthodox service.
It's funny, my wife loves color. She loves deep, intense colors. And I never paid any attention to colors at all. I just, if I were a blue shirt and blue pair of pants for the rest of my life, I think they're blue, sometimes they're black. But she loves color, and it took me a long time to realize that, when I'm in church, that's another thing I can use that's another part of it, it's another part of the conversation that I never really paid as much attention to. And now I've tried to train myself to really enjoy colors and how they are, next to one another, and when they change in the services and things like that. I had a student one time, not long ago, who said something to me about, she loved the color in this painting we were looking at. And I think a few years before, I would have kind of poo-pooed her and said, oh, you have to look at what the meaning is. And I was like, right, yeah, the color's cool, isn't it? So yeah, just to say that, yeah, even, in my better than a half century, there are all these new things that I keep finding out in the liturgy that I hadn't noticed. And it's cool. And I think it is great it's great to have that as a kid.
Other questions? All right, well, let's thank Dr. Robson for
You're very kind.